the Culture Chat hosted by WorkXO. Our mission is to upgrade work. Find out more about our Workplace Genome Project at workxo.com. And now, over to our host for today.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Culture Chat podcast. My name is Jamie Notter. I'm with WorkXO, and as usual, my partner in crime is Charlie Judy. Charlie, say hi.
What's going on, everybody?
And our guest for today's conversation is Jonathan Raymond, and he's with a company called Refound, and author of a book called Good Authority. And our conversation today is going to be focusing on something actually that I think is really important, actually literally something that Charlie and Maddie and I were talking about in our partner meeting last week, the issue of accountability and holding people accountable. So, Charlie, let me kick it over to you to frame it a little, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I'll start by saying that I wish Jonathan and Refound were around when I was, for a very long time, an HR leader, kind of on the other side of the table, and either helping my peers become more effective in those conversations, but also myself. I mean, I find that this idea of accountability sometimes has the connotation of jerk, or the asshole policy that we talk about sometimes, or the no asshole policy sometimes we talk about. So I'm really interested to hear what Jonathan has to say. And Jonathan, as we usually do, why don't you just take a minute or two to kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll kick this off with our big question of the day.
Sure. Thanks so much, guys, for having me on. I look forward to the conversation, and I feel similarly. I wish that I had some people educating me to some of the things I try to help leaders see back in my days in leadership roles at different levels. So, just the quick background on me is I've spent basically the last 15 years doing two things. I've been business guy by day and spiritual personal growth seeker by night. I was the CEO of a company called eMyth that probably a lot of people in your audience would be familiar with. There was a coaching company behind that very well-known book. And I'm sure we'll get into it quite a bit. But basically what I discovered, I was very new to the coaching and leadership industry, was that there was a lot of great ideas and a lot of really well-intentioned people and open-hearted leaders who were struggling with this topic of accountability, including myself. And so I decided to build a brand that was really based in what I consider to be not necessarily a new idea around accountability, but a more modern approach and philosophy for how to hold people accountable, how to engage accountability in a conversation that's really about self-development and not about punitivity. So the company is called Refound. The book is called Good Authority, and we're a very new brand in this exploding space of company culture and engagement. And I'm just out and about sharing ideas in the book and trying to bring the best of what I've learned the hard way into the future.
Cool. Excellent resource for our audience. So I appreciate that. We're going to start with our big question and sort of see where it goes from there. But as I said before, this is about holding people accountable. How do you hold people accountable without acting like a jerk? Because that's the big concern. So what do you got for us?
So the thing that I try to talk with leaders about is what I call spontaneous management combustion, and really what we're talking about is how to avoid it, how to avoid spontaneous management combustion. And so I'm sure you guys are very familiar, both on the having experienced it and probably having perpetuated it in one form or another, where we have people on our teams, in our organizations, we see behavior. And we don't intervene, or we intervene only partially, and we let that behavior go on, and we see people struggling in their relationships with their teammates. We see them struggling with time management. We see them struggling with risk taking. There's a kind of a pretty short list of the themes that we see with people. And mostly what we do is avoid it because it's difficult, it's uncomfortable, and it's hard to know what to say in a professional setting, how to approach what can be very personal topics in a way that doesn't trigger defensivity, where people feel like they have room to grow and to learn from their mistakes. And so we kind of avoid, or sometimes mostly avoid those conversations. And then we end up being a jerk because we end up lashing out later down the line when we've let that frustration build. We act out either overtly or subtly, managing around people, talking about them in leadership meetings, going home and complaining to our spouses and partners and friends. And so there's all this energy, all this frustration, worry, and concern is going everywhere except where it needs to go, which is in a real, honest conversation with one person about how they're showing up and how they could do it differently. And so that's really what this new model for accountability looks like.
So, Jonathan, there are all of these layers and relationships and dynamics to the workplace, and what you just described was generally a one-sided proposition. Is it a two-sided proposition? Is accountability the two-sided proposition, or is being a jerk or otherwise a two-sided proposition? Is it possible to be the recipient of, or to be the one trying to be held accountable, yet you're the one that's the jerk? I mean, I don't know. I don't even know how to articulate it, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think that there's an ingredient that is mostly missing from the conversation is that there's a reality to organizational structure and hierarchy. And even in organizations where people try to flatten hierarchy, those hierarchies are still there, by and large. And there's a kind of a pushback against the trend towards flat structures and open offices and everybody on the same team, because not everybody's on the same team. We may be united towards a common goal, but people have different levels of authority and experience in an organization and responsibility. And so I think that there has to be an acknowledgement first of the power dynamics that are implicit in an organization. But inside of that, absolutely, there's a way to receive feedback that is open and curious about your own self-development. And there's a way to receive feedback that is shut down and closed-minded and perpetuates the problem. But mostly what I would say is that the leader has to go first, right? The leader, the manager has to open the door to a more genuine conversation because the organization and the structure overall has made it difficult, more difficult than it should be for the employee or report, whatever you want to call it, for that person on the receiving end to actually be in a place to receive that feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when there's a power difference like that, that's actually part of the responsibility of having that power.
Yes,
is creating that space where that's going to happen, as opposed to what I've seen a lot of the time, where people are like, "Well, why didn't you tell me? Like, my door was always open," kind of thing. And like that's nice, but I've seen lots of open door policies that result in empty doors, empty open doors, like no one's going through them.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of what you're talking about, though, so my background's in conflict resolution, so this is sort of near and dear to my heart as well. But a lot of, I think, what you're pointing to in terms of not letting things build up, like in conflict resolution, we talk about moving towards the conflict as opposed to away from it. Mm-hmm. A lot of that but is facilitated by some basic emotional intelligence stuff. I mean, is that at the heart of this?
It is. And what I found was that what people need is permission to go there. And it's actually simpler than we often make it out to be in our industry, in that oftentimes people know they know what they're avoiding. And what they need, and what I've tried to do, is develop really a script and specific things to say, phrases, reframes of when you find yourself in that position of, the moment where you're going to avoid the conflict or move away from it in those terms. And what if you didn't? Well, it's nice to say, well, next time that happens, I'm gonna lean into it, but how? And that's really what we're doing at Refound, is to give people the step-by-step methodology for, okay, this happens. Now you could step off, you could step away and let this problem persist, or here's a method, here's a thing to say to move the conversation forward.
So we talk a lot when we talk about culture, Jonathan, and when we look at organizations and try to kind of characterize their culture, using any number of terms. But one of them is how evolved that organization is on a spectrum of kind of future of work. So if future of work is the destination, then we talk about organizations as being a traditionalist, kind of methodologies and operating systems that are kind of rooted in the past, and then contemporary, and then futurist. It seems like there are approaches that in maybe the more futurist organization would be received as kind of that jerk approach to accountability, but work really well in the more traditional environment. So, I'd see, and this is, I guess, a question, kind of check me here. It would seem that there are some people who are like, you know what, don't sugarcoat it. Don't give me the soft stuff. Just tell me what the heck I need to do. How do you identify the differences in who needs what and who wants what, and or should we be doing that?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that there's a sobriety to that inquiry that I love, which is, where is the organization today? And, we can all aspire to, being in a better place, but what's realistic? Who are the leaders that we have? How much work have they done on themselves? Excuse me. What's the availability index, let's say, inside the organization? And I think that, and this, I don't have an infinite set of companies that I've worked with, but the companies that I am working with, what the pattern that I'm seeing is mostly, and again, this is not a universal statement, but mostly what I see are leaders in young technology, growing companies, marketing, healthcare, software, a lot of the companies that I work with are on the West Coast. And what I'm seeing is leaders being too nice. And then, they're either walked all over, or they're kind of caught in the middle between the C-suite and the frontline teams. There's a lot of first-time managers, and so what I'm seeing is that there's a toughening up that's needed, which is not to not be compassionate, not to be understanding, but to do it in a direct way, and to actually create boundaries. And this is when I talk with HR leaders, every single day, they say to me, our managers are too nice. They don't know how to set boundaries. They don't know how to create fair consequences when people screw things up. And then we end up in these perpetual cycles where I had one HR leader say to me, I feel like our culture is like a bodybuilder. Like, it looks really good on the outside and people say really nice things. But if you scratch the surface, like, our cholesterol is terrible. I love it. It's like, and that's what I find so often is that, they rate this one company when they asked people like to rate the culture on a scale of 1 to 10, the culture got like a 9.2. That was its self-assessment. But when you actually talk to individuals, people are miserable. People don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. They don't feel valued. So there's this massive gap between our intentions and the impact of our intentions. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where
I know what I love about it, actually, and that is sort of akin to what we do with organizations, and what Charlie was just talking about in terms of where you are in the continuum. Like, where you are in the continuum is not the point. How where you are in the continuum directly contributes to whether you succeed or not is the point.
Yes.
And so this idea of too nice or not nice enough, both of them actually can be a detriment, depending on what you got going on. And so you actually have to manage that and pay attention to it and sort of, work on it.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that, we set leaders up to fail when we don't honor where they are. And so, if there's a leader who comes from a pretty traditional background and is used to working in command and control environments, I'm not going to try to get him to, this radically new place overnight.
Right.
What I am going to try to do is to have him own where he is, to be able to talk with his team and say, I come from a pretty traditional command and control environment. And so this, this new world, I want to get there, but this is hard for me. Oh my God, right? That's like people will just be like, oh, thank God. We know that about you. Thanks for telling us.
Yeah. I love that because, again, we talk about that same thing with culture. This idea that you're either good or you're bad is a bunch of baloney in the realm of work. Like, start by understanding who you are, own it, and then figure out how you iterate towards, the change that you need, right? That and that may not be a flip of the switch. That may take time, and so on and so forth. I think if you can apply that to really anything in the world of work, we kind of let our guard down a little bit, and we just start to focus on what we need to do.
Yeah, Well, and I think our industry, well, I don't know all of your backgrounds, but certainly my industry in the coaching world has really done people a disservice because, pick your author, and hopefully I'm not the next one of them, but there's a lot of people, mostly white men, painting a picture of this like mythical, awesome leadership universe that they don't themselves live. Mm-hmm. And then people say, oh, well, I want to be like that person, but it can't be like that person because that person is not like that person. and then they're trying to lead in this way that is completely impossible to embody. And so if we can change, and I think we're doing it, right? I think, you got what you guys are doing, what we're doing. Mm-hmm. There are other voices where I think we're on this pivot moment of having a much more sober conversation about the spectrum of leadership and about what honesty actually is. And not and these guru models of the past. I think they're dying away. I hope they're dying away.
I actually really love you've used sobriety and sober a couple times. I was
just going to say the same thing.
I love that phrase, and it's like waking up to the fact that, man, we were drunk on bad business books.
Yeah, totally.
Time, totally. And this sort of if only, and everyone copying sort of the best practices and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The sober approach is like, what? Here's what's real. Here's what is, and here's what we need to do. It's really more disciplined. It is one foot in front of the other, a
day at a time. If
right.
You want to borrow from the 12-step vernacular.
Exactly. But it's like one example from a client we worked with, because everyone's talking about, including me actually, a lot of the time, about the need for more transparency, the need for more open communication, and I believe in that at a big picture level. But in this particular system, they had already become so transparent that they were paralyzed. Mm. Like everyone had to know everything all the time, and they stopped and they honored that because that was who they were, and they were doing that, and they just noticed that they were falling farther and farther behind from what their constituents really needed them to do. They're a nonprofit, and that sort of clarity for them was like, we need to stop that. We need to create some opacity.
Yeah.
We need to not tell people things and be really clear why we're doing it, right? It's not because
be transparent about your opacity.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the owning it part. Yeah.
And that's I don't know. That's a piece of the culture conversation I think has been missing, and it's nice to hear someone else championing that cause.
So I think we're kind of creeping up on these things always go so quickly. And so I don't know that this is necessarily the last question, but this is just kind of a warning that we're probably running out of questions given our time slot. Do you have Jonathan, some kind of tangible or quick hit, tips for those people, let's just say employees for these purposes, who are sitting across the table from somebody who's doing their best to hold them accountable, that is just doing a really bad job of it? Like, what should they say? What can they say? What can they do to either acknowledge that something needs to change, encourage the person to do so? I don't know. Like I'm kind of going back to this two-way street and recognizing that maybe there are things that the employees themselves can do to actually move the conversation.
Yeah, I think there are, and most of the. I love your orientation because I think most of the conversation for way too long has been about CEOs and business owners and senior leaders, and not enough on what employees can do. And so one of the things that I don't have the fortune to work with as many employees as I would like. As our company builds, hopefully I'll get more of that. Mostly I work with CEOs and owners and senior leaders and try to kind of intuit and kind of get into those conversations. But when I do have that chance, what I try to encourage people to do is really the flip side of the same thing, which is, and I love that example of if you went to your manager and you say, do you have some space? I want to talk about, I've been thinking about my own personal development. And I want to, when you have a little bit of time, I want to have a conversation with you about some things that have been on my mind. Where you actually, you start to come with some of that transparency and vulnerability, so that they know, okay, they are on notice. They're saying like, oh, okay, this is a new kind of conversation that this person wants to have. And then you have a little more space to say, one of the things that you've often asked me, what do I like about working here, and what do I want more of? And there's something, and it's kind of hard to articulate, but I actually want more accountability. And we can talk about what that looks like, but I actually want I feel a little fuzzy around what my role is, and sometimes I feel clear and sometimes I don't. But so we could talk about different versions of that. But being able to surface to your boss from a self-ownership place of what you're wanting for your own self-development, rather than what they're doing wrong, then I think there's a very rich conversation to be had. And oftentimes managers don't know, or they feel like any pushing or pressing or edginess in the conversation is going to be received wrongly. And what if by employees saying, look, I don't want you to be mean, but I want you to be firm. And because that's going to help me figure out the boundaries of my role and get better, which is what I want. And so I think there are different versions of that, but I think that's the spirit of that conversation.
Oh, love it.
Yeah, I love that. I love the coming from that approach of sort of making a request.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to a demand or a judgment, right? That you suck at giving accountability, holding me accountable. It's like, here's what I'm looking for. Because requests can always be met with, I'm not going to do that right now, but here's my counteroffer. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It opens the conversation as opposed to closing it. I really like that.
Right. And if somebody doesn't want, if you have that conversation with a manager and they don't take you up on that, well, you don't want to work there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Then you've already disengaged. If that conversation goes nowhere, now maybe there's another opportunity in that organization, but you have a very short future with that manager if that conversation goes nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been talking about that for a long time. This sort of clarity of there needs to be more separations inside organizations. I mean, people need to quit more. People need to get reassigned more. People need to get fired more. I mean, Charlie always gets mad at me when I say this stuff because he's like got an HR background. It's like, dude, you can't say that. You're gonna get us in trouble. But I mean, like, if we could do that, I think we'd be building stronger workplaces.
Well, for the record, I don't know that I've ever said, dude, you can't say that. I am, HR background or not, I'm of the same ilk. I mean, yes, I think we all have to get comfortable. It's why I've struggled with the term retention, and with this, that obviously, pays images of someone chained to their desk. Like, that may not be the outcome, the goal that we're going after. We got to get comfortable with movement, and whether we like it or not, Jamie, as you well know, certainly the newest entrants to the workforce, the millennials, are very happy and comfortable with movement. So it's something we got to pay more attention to.
Yeah, if I can interrupt for, I don't know if I can add 45 seconds.
Yeah, sure.
I have this picture in my mind, and I don't know what I don't know what the ultimate fidelity looks like. But an organization of individuals where people move through, like, they have kind of a passport and they enter into that organization and they fully own their role for as long as they're there, and they plug in and then they plug out, but without all of the interpersonal drama that goes with, feeling like, that all the betrayal and the loss and there's all these psychological phenomenon that I think is an artifact of our old way of doing things. And I love circling and putting a line through this idea of retention, or at least reevaluating it. And I think that's where we're going. And I don't have all the answers of how to get there, but it's exciting.
Reid Hoffman actually wrote a book called The Alliance. Is that right? I'm not remembering now. But anyway, the concept that he wrote about in HBR actually is tour of duty. Like, let's restructure this. Forget the lifetime employment stuff. Let's structure it into tours of duty. Get really clear on what the exchange is. And if you want to re-up for like 17 consecutive tours and work your whole career there, that's fine.
Yeah.
But each one is a tour and has a specific sort of exchange of value between organization and individual.
Nice.
And so I also think that's sort of where we're
Dude, this is a topic for a podcast to come. I think we have to explore this notion, because accountability leads to, or lack thereof, leads to other actions in the workplace, which we are also, by the way, not good at. So, there's tentacles to this one.
All right. Well, that is a reminder, however, that I think we are running low on time and should wrap this up. But Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. This was a fun conversation. We really appreciate it. And I believe you can be found online at refound.com. Is that correct?
That is.
Okay, so look him up, look his book up, and again, thanks everyone for being with us on our podcast. We really appreciate you listening. If you were listening via iTunes or Podbean, don't forget to head over to our blog and subscribe. Actually go in and subscribe to the blog, because we frequently have, Jonathan, you didn't know this maybe, we frequently have our guests write us a blog post after the interview. So we want to find out even more there. We want you to be able to subscribe to our blog. So please do that. And thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time on the next Culture Chat podcast.
And that was the Culture Chat today. We'll have some highlights up on the blog soon. Find out more about WorkXO and how to map your workplace genome at workxo.com.